The deck lights over the command corridor were dim to twilight, and the big viewing blister, at the spine of the ship, drank the stars whole. Leia liked it this way, with the clatter and breath of the rebel carrier muted to a steady pulse. When there were no speeches left to deliver and no fragile coalitions to coax across void-wide channels, when even Han had vanished down some gangway with Chewbacca's graveling commentary in his wake, she walked the long curve of transparent steel above the hangar bay and let the cold help her think. The cold seemed honest. It made a clean edge of the air. She pressed her palm to the blister and felt the faintest tremor of the carrier's frame as the sublight engines corrected yaw. The stars did not shimmer here. They were hard, quiet jewels, and there was no horizon to force them into meanings. A breath in, a breath out. She had learned the exercise from an Alderaanian harpist at a palace reception, years ago on Coruscant, when she had been a senator first and a saboteur only in the dreamed grammar of speeches. The harpist, a woman with hair braided in a pattern of tides and hands that smelled like fort wine and copper strings, had shown her how to center a phrase, hold it steady until it became its own stillness. Breathe to the measure, and the measure will keep you. Leia had folded that lesson in with protocols and parliamentary gambits, and the thousand slick tricks of being seen without being owned by the seeing. Her palm cooled against the blister. In the reflection, the faintest ghost of her face watched back. Hair up, not for style but because loose ends caught in the seals of helmets. Eyes that had learned impatience to survive patience, the slightly stubborn line that grief had carved from nose to mouth and refused to sand away. She did not look like the girl who had argued about trade routes on Coruscant, or the one who had hidden messages in her own breath for a farm boy and a smuggler to find. Another breath in. Somewhere deep in the ship, a coolant pump throbbed, a bass note under the skin. Leia let her body take that rhythm and rest in it. She did not fall asleep. It came upon her anyway, as if sleep had decided it could take a new shape and walk to her in the open. White. Dot. The white was not an absence but a presence, the kind that swallowed sound and reflected it back as a pressure behind the eyes. A white plane under a vast sky, not gray, not blue, something thinner, something so cold it sang. Metal hummed underfoot, buried cables, shield coils asleep. She smelled resin and oil that had not yet been spilled. The white was interrupted by a line of figures, small against the plane of it, moving, the way her people moved when they carried everything they were into another brittle refuge. She knew the way the cold seized breath at the hinge of the throat. She knew the taste of fear when it could not name its own shadow yet. A shadow cut over the plain then, long as a fleet, and though the sky had no sun, she felt heat against her cheek as if a furnace door had been opened behind her. It was not heat. It was attention. It knew her. Somewhere out beyond the white and the humming coils, metal feet crunched down and steam fugged from joints, and sensors woke like eyes reflected in a predator's pupils. Leia's breath snagged. The white plane flashed. It turned to a city made of curves and horizons, a city resting on cloud like a ship on a sleeping sea. The hum became a deeper note, a warning, a plea. Then the white returned, and in the white, there was a voice like a bell rung underwater. And on that, Great. For the first time, the pattern lived all at once. The web glinted everywhere. She pulled her palm from the blister and found her mouth dry. Stars. Only stars, and the low red hazard beacons stippling the edge of the hangar deck. The ship held its course. Nothing had changed that she could point to. Still, she knew with a certainty that belonged to marrow, not argument, that there was a chain of events moving toward her, and it had the weight of machinery, ruthless, precise, after its own ends and indifferent to anything in its way. The hum of the coolant pump swelled. It made a chord with the faint vibration of the blister and the soft shiver of environmental processors. Leia let the sound pass through her, and, as she had on Coruscant, set a measure under it. Breathe to the measure. Don't try to fight the whole tide. Choose a stone and stand on it. Winter found her like that some hours later, in a half-light that made everything look like it had been drawn by a careful hand, and left uncolored to avoid telling too much at once. Winter always moved with a courtesy that did not waste the courtesy of others. She stopped short of the blister and folded her hands. "You haven't slept," Winter said. "No," Leia said, because who else could she tell the truth to? "I think it found me anyway." Winter's eyebrows lifted the smallest degree. Her hair, white even when they had both still been girls, braided down her back like a drawn path. That can be defied with a schedule? That doesn't bother with schedules," Leia said. "The kind that thinks you'll be so distracted drawing a straight line that you don't notice the floor has started slanting." Winter came up beside her and put her hand to the blister too, like they could anchor the carrier with their fingertips. "You've had them again. I don't know what to call them." Leia wanted, more than she could admit, to be the kind of person who said, "Nightmares. Those you could scold. It's not like the nightmares after Yavin. It feels like the thought of a place that isn't ours yet." "Then?" Winter's mouth softened, not quite a smile, not quite grief. "And you feel it belongs to us?" "I feel that it will belong to us," Leia said, then stopped because the grammar mattered. Each word tilted the floor another notch. "That it must, or we won't belong anywhere else." They were quiet together. It was an old quiet, practiced in the ruins of schedules and charters. Winter's memory could recite a speech from its opening breath to its last courteous closing. The shapes of the letters intact in her mind, the pauses counted. Leia's memory held the weight of how each line had landed in a room. Between them they could rebuild an hour so faithfully you might almost stand in it again. This, what had come upon Leia in the white, was not something that fit in their old compartments. It ran past the edges of recitation. It wanted to spill. "What did you see?" Winter asked. "Cold. A plane. People moving like we move when everything we have fits in our arms." Leia's finger traced a circle on the blister, fogging it a little. "A city in the clouds later. And a shadow. The kind you watch out of the corner of your eye so you don't let it know you've seen it." Winter nodded as if that made a tidy sense. "Then we should make ready for the cold." She said, "And befriend the city in the clouds. And soon." "Soon," Leia echoed. There was comfort in plain phrases. "We have eyes on systems in the rim that would be unfriendly to a climate control technician, let alone a field hospital. Rekan thinks someplace with a planetary shield network already in ruin would be best. Fewer adjustments, less interference to hide us. Which means more places for old alarms to wake when we breathe near them," Winter said. "Which means we need our own alarms," Leia said. She knew without argument that the shadow she had felt would not tire. It could walk for years on the promise of a victory it wanted to taste. And we need contingency on contingency. We need redundancies to our redundancies, and decoys that will make even our decoys look naive. And no. Winter looked at her again, a more measuring look, not unkind. "You're speaking as if you've been told." Leia held still. "I know how that sounds. It sounds like you once sounded on Coruscant when you had numbers the rest of us hadn't been shown yet," Winter said, gentle. "Except I think this time you didn't get them from a staffer's mistake or a misrouted memo." Leia exhaled. The breath trembled, and she did not conceal it. "No," she said. "Not a memo." "You don't have to name it," Winter said. "Naming isn't always the safe part. Doing is the safe part." Leia took her hand away from the blister. Her palm left a print that faded in the ship's thin breath. "Then we should go wake Rekan early and ask for more sensor nests on our outer shells. Double the watch, but quietly. We can reassign maintenance rotations to make it look like nothing has changed. And speak to the smugglers," Winter said without disdain. "In their rebellion there were no pure categories. They know what hunts them. They will have opinions about a shadow." "And then Seer." Leia's mouth almost smiled. "One smuggler in particular will have opinions about any sentence that includes the word Shadow. She didn't say his name. It changed a room when she said his name, and for this breath she wanted rooms to hold still. They left the blister. The carrier's corridors were in their morning hush, the intermediate time when night shift learned who had gone missing and day shift braced for what the night shift had failed to solve. Rikan lived as if sleep were an old hobby he kept out of sentiment rather than practice. He was already reading a report when they reached his office. The corners of the flimsy weighted with cups that had once held tea, and now looked like pale planets orbiting a stern sun. "Your Highness," he said, which could mean a dozen things from this man. Today, it meant, "And what do you know that I should know?" The second look, over the tops of his lenses, meant, "And do you trust it enough to make me change the shape of the next day?" "We want to adjust the censored dragnet," Leia said. It was a framework, not a confession. Rikan took his time. He had once been a general on worlds that believed in applying force as a solution to questions, not an invitation to new ones. The rebellion had turned him into a thinker, or had revealed him as one. He tapped the flimsy with one finger. "We're already at the bare edge of crew capacity to interpret that much noise." "We'll take interpretation ourselves," Winter said. "Offload simple analysis to volunteer teams. We can train them in the morning. Leia will write the protocol." "And the why?" Rikan asked, blunt. "They're listening," Leia said quietly, and there was no fitting it into a language that sounded like Coruscant. "They will send small eyes before they send the big ones. We can make those eyes blink before they notice we're looking back." Rikan watched her with an attention that had never felt like interrogation. It felt like weathering. He'd stand there and be the storm and see if she would stand with him. "You feel that you feel this," he said at last, and his voice made space for the strange. "I do," Leia said. "Good," he said, and the word was a gate opening. "Because if you were guessing, I would refuse. But if you feel it, and I know what your feelings have done for us, I'd be a fool to teach the floor to tilt the other way when you've already braced your feet." He had the new orders out of the room in minutes, and the ship changed pitch, almost imperceptibly. Leia felt it in the busy air, the way groups formed and dissolved in the corridor, the way the mess hall took its lines, the way communications went quiet for a precise beat, and then resumed with an added layer that did not show on the surface. Doing was safer than naming, as Winter said. Doing did not invite the part of the mind that liked to throw stones at its own windows. Han found her in the hangar after she had finished with a refitted sensor console that had never believed it would be asked to care about heat signatures the size of a man's hand. The Millennium Falcon squatted in a bay that somehow looked less tidy around it than the same bay had minutes before. Chewbacca was in the access crawl, wrestling with a plate that had never quite fit anything it was asked to cover. The Wookiee growled in a range that made technicians' tools vibrate. "Your worshipfulness," Han said from the ramp, and managed to fit 3 separate opinions into the mock title. Admiration. Annoyance. Something like fondness that didn't know what to do with its hands. "We don't do that one anymore," Leia said, without heat. She wiped a spot of sealant from her thumb with a cloth, and did not look at him until she was ready. "Sure we do," Han said. He sauntered badly. She had learned the precise ways his sauntering was honest, and the precise way he wanted it to be read. Today, it was a brave face, and brave faces earned a little privacy. "I hear you're rigging the big ears to listen for something you hope isn't there." "We always listen for things we hope aren't there," Leia said. "That's most of the job." "I usually listen to my ship," Han said, as if they were 2 different religions, and they could agree to disagree. "And then, what's got you spooked?" "Spooked?" She almost laughed. "Nothing I can pass as tidy data. Do you want me to say, intuition, so you can tell me about all the trouble intuition got you out of back when you were the scourge of some poor shipping lane?" He grinned, quick and real. "I wasn't the scourge. I was more of a benevolent inconvenience. Ask around." "I have asked," she said dryly. "I'm acquainted with the concept of inconvenience around you." "Yes." He reached the bottom of the ramp and looked back up it, as if the ship might speak to his better judgment. "I'm thinking about moving on when this refit is done," he said casually, like a man discussing whether he could opt out of. Jabba's not a forgetful kind of slime. And he's not big on payment plans. No. There it was, the other shadow she pretended not to look at directly, because looking straight at it made things in the room change color. She looked at it now because not looking would do no good. "Is that a plan?" Leia asked. "Or the shape of the story you tell yourself so it doesn't hurt when you make the plan?" He winced in theatrical offense, then let the theater go. His eyes were dark, and when he let them be, very honest. "I don't want to lead your fleet into my bad decisions," he said. "If the Empire comes sniffing, I don't want to be the one who draws them. That's the truth you asked for once." She felt, without needing to name it, the thread that ran out of him like a taut line into the wider pattern. When she had seen the city in the clouds, she knew now. There had been a figure there with a gambler's posture, and a smile that remembered debts as other men remembered love. There was danger wrapped around that smile. There was also salvation of an intricate, unwelcome kind. She could follow that thread with her fingers if she let herself. "Then pay your debts," she said, more gently than she meant to. "And come back. Or don't tell me you will. Both are possible kinds of living." "You want me to leave?" He was mischief and injury and suspicion, all in one sentence. "I want us to survive," she said, and her voice did not waver. "And I don't want you to build a fight you can't win with yourself because you promised me something you don't know if you can keep." Chewbacca thumped the plate into place with a sound that suggested triumph. Then the plate fell off again with a clang suggesting the universe's sense of humor. Han glanced up at it, swore in a language that had too many plosives to be pleasant, and bellowed something back. Chewbacca roared and absurdly laughed. Leia stood there and let the domesticity of their quarrel put a gentler surface on her bones. After Han left to procure a tool he had once swore he would never use again, R2-D2 rolled out from behind a crate with the leisurely air of a droid who had been in a corridor on the other side of the ship, only because he wanted to be there. He beeped at her, a query wrapped in 3 jokes, and a whomey innocence so improbable it had to be deliberate. "I'm fine," Leia said to the dome. "I'm merely rearranging the galaxy with my hands, and I've decided to keep all the screws left afterward because we're bound to need them." R2 beeped again. It was a knowing little sound. C-3PO's voice came from nowhere and everywhere as always, when the protocol droid believed he had located a conversation without him. "Princess Leia, if you are rearranging the galaxy, may I suggest that we put the outer rim nearer to the core? It would make travel so much more convenient, and I, for one, would appreciate fewer trips through unregistered space, where people are always so rude." "Ben? Owen?" "Noted," Leia said, and smiled, and then did not smile because the white plane came up in her again, like a tide that had ignored a wall and found the doorway through. She was not asleep. She was not removed from the hangar bay. She could hear Chewbacca's tools, Han's voice, the complaint of a Isolamiri-colored paint drum rolling where it should not, but the other sense laid itself over all of it with the peculiar courtesy of inevitability. White. Dot. The hum of buried coils. And then a door in the white, if a door could be a change of air and a smell like wet soil held in a cupped hand. The white tilted. It became greens so deep, they were almost black. Cold water on the tongue. Roots like mussels. Slick with age. A hut, with a roof that had grown out of itself. Smoke bluer than the rest of the air. Names like breath through leaves. Yoda. Someone said far away, ancient as a lullaby. The syllables hung like beads on a string. Over that, higher and thinner, a whisper that did not bother with syllables at all, only a quality of attention. Lightly, as if afraid to frighten an animal. Qui-Gon. She did not know what the words meant, but they had the weight of a place that had mattered to other lives. She drew breath carefully and let the 2 rooms share. Hangar over swamp, swamp under metal. The Falcon's lines married to a cloud city's curve in a way that felt inevitable, out beyond language. She did not flinch away. She let the threads settle in her hands. She found Riken again twice that day. The first time to stand in front of a wall-sized scan of 3 candidate systems and speak. Without apology for the one that bit at the back of her tongue like a cold the body has not yet decided to admit. The second time to ask, not as a princess, not as a general without rank, but as a woman who had nested too many families in flimsy shelters, to send a small party to plant caches and senses in the white before they chose to live there. Riken looked at her and said, "Pick your team." She did not choose the obvious bravos. She chose Winter because nothing escaped Winter, and because Winter's presence steadied her without dampening her fire. She chose a technician from the Yavin hospitals, who could make a generator sing even when its coils had all been installed backward by some hurried savant. He had hands like careful birds, and a habit of being quiet in ways that made other people's noise gentler. She chose a pilot who had once landed a snub fighter missing a wing without scratching so much as the paint on the canopy. A woman with a laugh like a hearth when hearths were allowed. She thought of asking Han and did not, because that would bring the shadow forward to look her full in the face, and she needed that particular note to sound later. They dropped into real space, above a system whose star had the weary look of lights left burning in a hallway overnight. Its planets wandered as if they had forgotten how to climb and fall in elegant curves. The fourth world wore white from pole to pole like a garment cut too generously. At the edges of that garment, bands of steel blue glinted like bindings. The pilot, Tyne, whistled low through her teeth. "That's a lot of cold." "It's a lot of quiet," Winter said, "which is better than a lot of noise." History hung about the world like a thin bruise. Leia felt it in her chest. Winds had combed it for centuries without finding anything they wanted to keep. Men had tried to build small things, and those small things had frozen and sighed and gone back into snow. The scale was honest. No romance. But in the layers of ice, in the way the crust held, in the way the sky made a cup. She felt the others. The coils that would hum, the shield that would sleep until someone shook it awake, the corridors where a laugh would steam in the air like something the mouth had conjured up, the landing field where a freighter with a personality would complain about the cold until it was ready to leave, and maybe not leave. They took a scout shuttle down through a thin aurora that wore colors only at the edges, like modest jewelry on a stern wrist. The landing struts sank and held. The door opened to a precision of cold that put needles in the nose and woke the tired in the back of the eyes. Leia stood at the threshold and tasted the air like a test. Snow. The oil hum from the shuttle. The bright, thin smell of it being too late to go back. The technician, Bren, swore into his scarf in a manner that suggested deep and varied vocabulary. "I can make half our kit behave as if it was born here," he said. "The other half will pretend to behave and then sulk, and I'll have to sing to it." "Then start singing," Leia said, and stepped out onto the white. Her boots sank an inch. The small movement of her body sent a shiver through the crust that pushed away from her in a ring. Under the snow, the coils she had felt in the ship, asleep still. She closed her eyes and lowered her breath into the pace of the place. The threads in her hands slipped through her fingers and settled differently. New anchor points revealed themselves. Drifts that never moved because a tooth of rock under them bit the wind. A valley where the air pooled in a way that would preserve warmth if you knew how to coax it. A ridge that would provide a line of sight to the sky for a sentinel who could be patient enough to earn what patience takes. She did not narrate this to the others. She walked until the ring of the first step's shiver had reached and faded, and then she stood still. When it came, the sense of being examined, the sense of a gaze that did not need an eye. It came not from the sky, but from the belly of the world. It was not alive as a creature is alive, it was old as a habit. Something had been built here once and buried by design, and parts of it still knew their names and woke at attention. She could almost hear the words. Shield. Sensor. 8. Dot. She answered with her own. Safe. Quiet. Home. Not forever. Only until. Until was the honest kindness of it. Winter watched her without making the watching a wait. What do you need? Markers, Leia said. Not the obvious kind. Thread them through the drifts in a way that looks like the wind did it. Put one in the ridge there and another in the cut that will look like a fault if you don't know it was made. Tie them to a pattern of thermal shifts we can teach a child in 5 minutes, and that will break an Imperial scanner's first packet of assumptions. And, she paused, unusual for her, words had always come as cleanly as a blade if she owned them. And a thing that should not be here but is here already. Bren thought for a heartbeat. A weather station long dead, he said. I can find its bones. We'll take what's still stubborn and make it ours. By the time they lifted, the light had changed, but not its quality. It was a precise light that did its job and asked nothing else of anyone. Leia stood at the shuttle's port and watched the world tilt away, and the pattern in her hands felt less like a thing she had stolen, and more like a thing she had been given on condition. She learned its uses. When she slept in the shuttle's narrow bunk, the white was the floor of her sleep. The door in that white opened again, and she walked through to the city in the clouds with the caution of a guest who has not yet learned the host's rules. The corridors were so clean they shone. The air tasted of sweetness meant for children, and for men who wanted to be reassured they were good. A man with a cape laughed in a way that suggested he put on laughter as easily as he put on silk. He kissed the air near her cheek and smelled of a card table kept warm by hands. He offered shelter that would cost more later than at the door. She still took it in the dream because dreams are honest with their bargains. Then the door closed. Then the swamp again, with its patience. A small being moved within it like a man who had learned how to step on water and sink only when sinking gave him what walking could not. Yoda. The leaves breathed again as if the name kept them green. And over it, light. Light that did not flicker, that did not have to shine on anything to keep being light. Qui-Gon, the whisper said, the way someone might say, "It's safe. Come forward. The animal will not bolt now." She went forward until a warmth gathered where a mother would put her hand to soothe a child from a fright. When the warmth settled, she woke. Of her mother, she had never spoken. Of her mother she had said once to a man who had asked her without knowing what he was asking. Kind. Beautiful. It had felt like telling a lie for a good reason, the way she had always learned to lie when necessary. Now she lay in the bunk and let the breath roll out of her and thought, I knew that without anyone telling me. The pattern had handed it to me, the way a nurse hands a wrapped child to their father and says, "Hold. Don't think." Back aboard the carrier, the sensor net took its new shape, and the ship's sound changed again. She felt it before anyone told her. Listening was work now. It took a muscle you had to train the way a dancer trains a muscle you did not know the body had. The first probe came in so neatly it would have kissed the carrier's hull if the decoy hadn't been where she had told them to set it. They woke it not with a burst of drama, but with a sigh. A shift in the waste heat under a drifting blanket of dust. A glitch in a pattern of static that should have been as steady as a metronome. The small thing unfolded like a baby spider and looked around with all the casual tyranny of its breed. It saw nothing. It sent a soft inquiry into the dark, which hit 3 prepared reflections and returned a portrait of emptiness so plausible the probe relaxed. This was its mistake. The second reflection carried a phrase braided under the portrait like a hair woven into lace. Bren had called the phrase a cough, and that was how it functioned. The probe answered the cough. That answer contained its name, and when it spoke its own name into the decoy's small open mouth, the decoy swallowed the name whole. "Got you," Tyne said from the bay with a pilot's satisfaction. He blinked. 2 more in the outer shells, Winter said, fingers going confidently from switch to switch. "Our cough won't catch them both, but the first has already told us the syntax. We can say hello in a way that will make them think their own friends are boring." Dan Tor. Leia watched the pattern change, the way currents change when a single rock is shifted 1 hand's breadth downstream. Attention had turned. The probes were eyes. Eyes led to feet. The feet would follow the most promising scent. They had made themselves smell like dull rock. They could not do it forever. A long way out in the web, she felt the shadow turn its head, as if listening to something it had wanted desperately to hear, and now had heard. It was a relief to talk about schedules after that. Schedules were a dress she could wear in front of strangers who did not want to be told what she wanted to tell them. She worked with Recon on deployment rotations that would look to an Imperial scanner like an understaffed flotilla bored into a habit it could not afford to break. She built evacuation drills that did not know they were drills until the third step, because panic begins when you name it. She walked the hangar with Bren and let him show her what coils would insist on sulking, what generators could be bribed with the equivalent of a sweet biscuit to perform heroics, which conduits had opinions, and which, on the contrary, would live happily in impossible climates because they didn't know better. When she laughed with him, it was the laugh of a person who had remembered that the physics of a stubborn machine were its own form of faith. Han saw her laughing and didn't like it, because it is harder to leave a woman who is laughing with someone else. He came over with a stylus in his mouth and a look that said he had not fully decided if the stylus was a cigar he had heroically refrained from lighting in a hangar, or a symbol of the part of himself that wanted to be a serious commander when the day required it. "You two look like you're flirting with a power converter," he said. "We are," Leia said. "It flirts back, which is more than I can say for some captains." "Oh, I flirt back," Han said promptly. "I just do it with style." Chewbacca made a mournful, amused sound from under the Falcon. Leia fought not to be charmed and failed in a precise, privately acknowledged way. She felt the thread again, the one that ran from Han's shoulder like a taut golden line into the Cloud City, where a man in a cape would smile and lie and save and betray, in exactly the right order to be survivable. She took a breath and let the line rest. You cannot pull on all the threads at once. A web is not a rope. That night, or what the ship called night, she sat again under the blister. She had told no one to meet her there. The stars offered themselves up in their accurate cruelty, and she took what she could. She did not try to reproduce the white. She let it come as it would, the way a lake lets the wind walk across it. She heard Ben. It was not a voice the ears could easily carry. It was light striking the edges of the thought and making shapes there. Not a sentence yet, only the fact of him. The man who had taken Luke from Tatooine's heat and put him on a path. The man who had looked at her with a sorrow so clean it had not asked anything of her. She had thought once that her part in that man's war was to move ships and money and men, to assemble and rearrange so that the pieces would fall where they might purchase a slender purchase for the odds. Now she felt him like a breath at the nape of the mind. "I see you." A recognition more than a command. He made room around her for someone else to step forward in her attention. There it was, the shadow that had watched the white. It came nearer and did not hurry. This was a precise, faithful terror. Not the kind that leaps and scatters, but the kind that assumes it will be obeyed. She did not stand up from the blister. She did not turn away. She let it put out its hand and let that hand be a mask, black and smooth, and made to hide, and also to make a face where there had been a man. When it was close enough to admit human details to her, she felt the grief again, and under the grief, a tenderness so shocking it made her throat burn. "Father," said a thought in her that was not a thought, and she rebelled from it as she would have from a lie told about a dead friend. The pattern held steady around her to keep her from breaking against it. "Not yet," it said. Not like that. Not because of that word alone. She slept not at all that night and woke rested, which she did not trust. The second probe found them 3 days later, and this one sent back data before Bren could make it cough properly. Tyne took a team out in the dark to chase it down, and Leia felt, in the same moment that Recon said the words aloud, that there was nothing to be done now, but to prepare to run as if running had been the plan all along. "Then we run," she said, and every corridor in the ship named to exhale. Work moved to the surface, where it had always wanted to be. The makeshift school emptied. Its teacher, the kind of woman who is born knowing how to get children to trust that the day will make sense, went to the comms deck to take a position calling out numbers calm as a bedtime story. The kitchen issued cold rations in bags made for pockets and not for plates. Mechanics finished bolting what they could and labeled what they could not with curses and prayers. R2 beeped so briskly that 3PO had trouble keeping up with his scolds, though he tried manfully in 3 languages. They would go to the White because she had planted the right flags there, and the right bones had recognized their names, and because sometimes you have to walk into a vision with your chin up and let it place you where you dreamed you would stand. She drafted the order and did not linger on her signature. Han cornered her in the now empty schoolroom while the teacher wound twine around stacks of chalk as if she were tying up stubborn ideas to keep them from falling all over the floor. "When do we get to the part where your intuition tells me I'm going to be fine?" he asked, like it was a joke and like it wasn't. "When you stop needing to hear it," Leia said. She wanted, with a violence that surprised her, to tell him about the Cloud City, about the slab of cold that had sung in her bones like a funeral bell, about a man's mouth forming words on a catwalk above a wind whose hunger had teeth. She wanted to warn him, with all the words she had ever learned, and some she hadn't. She did not. The web in her hands tightened a fraction, as if to remind her that too much truth spoken too early is as useless as too little said too late. He made a dissatisfied noise and kicked, very lightly, at a table leg. "You're not coming in the Falcon." "I'm coming with the convoy," Leia said. "We'll need someone to talk to children and generators at the same time." "You're good at both." "I'm better at the second," she said. "Children don't believe me when I tell them a schedule is a game. Generators will pretend to believe anything if you say it with affection." She did not reach for him. She reached for the pattern and let it show her what she could hold, and what she could not, and where her hands were supposed to go right now. It set her down gently, even as it tightened its threads around her wrists, to keep her properly placed. "Do this," it said. "Do this now. The web has room for your sorrow later." When the fleet peeled off its anchors and made for the White, the stars opened like a map someone had folded in grief and refolded in hope, creased along different lines. Leia stood in the carrier's pit and spoke the numbers into the comms net, low and clear, because sometimes a steadiness of voice keeps the fabric of the hour from tearing. She named ships like daughters at a roll call. She listened with a new muscle to the way attention moved in the dark, to how the shadow angled to taste their wake. They made the crossing in pieces, because to hurry one hard thing is to break 3 small ones and lose the day anyway. The White received them. The first transports landed with a gracelessness that made pilots swear, and then promised to do better next time. The engineers swore at the cold honestly. The cold swore back with wind. Children were surprised to find that the snow would hold them if they learned to walk the way you walk on the backs of sleeping animals. Leia crouched in a corridor that smelled of machine oil and breath, and asked a generator to be brave for her. And it was, not because it loved her, but because some things are brave when asked plainly. Recon walked beside her and gave orders that became the bones of the place, and would later become a legend incorrectly retold. Winter managed 5 schedules at once, and made the mess hall feel like a place that had always existed. Tyne drew lines with the nose of her snowspeeder, the way a child draws lines on a new page. Not to make a picture, but to claim the space as a place she could imagine on purpose. Bren made the coils hum, coaxed the shield awake, and scolded it until it learned the difference between letting a friend through and spitting an enemy back out like gristle. Leia slept in a corner of a room that would later be called a command center. The White came for her not like a vision now, but like a house that had been shut and was being opened. The snap of a thick door, the first breath of air that smells of dust, and the old suite of wood. She walked it in her mind until she knew where the blown seals would hiss and where heat would gather like a secret. The shadow walked too, at the edges of the property, patient. Far away, the city in the clouds turned like a jewel in a careful hand. Far below, a swamp breathed in its own time. Light watched her without insisting that she be someone else first. Names drifted by, not to be grasped yet, only to be acknowledged. Ben.Sh. Yoda.O. Qui-Gon. She did not, even in her own mind, give the shadow a name. On the 3rd day, the alarms she had written, as if for a child, sang the way children sing when they are frightened and are trying not to tell you that they are afraid. The Proobs had sent back enough scraps. An Imperial fleet's attention had pivoted. The room went colder, and no draft caused it. Riken turned to her and saw that she had known already, and saved 3 seconds by not saying the obvious out loud. He said, instead, "If we must lose, where do you want the loss to land?" She felt the web seize, and then adjust. "You choose," the pattern said. "It will honor your choice in one place and make you pay somewhere else. That is how honest systems are." "Not here," Leia said. "Not yet. We'll give them the first field at the edge of the shield, at a place where the snow punishes weight. We will make them proud of their walking, and then take the ground out from under them for the length of a breath. The loss will teach us what they will risk to get what they want." "And after?" Riken asked. "After," Leia said, and did not finish the sentence because the after included a corridor of cloud and a gambler's smile, and a wind that tore words away. She steadied her voice. "After, they will believe we are less clever than we are. We will use that belief, and we will pay a price for their education." When she sent the orders, she felt the web pull tight and then relax just enough for breath. Tyne flew out with the first group of pilots, bright against the white. Bren took his hands to a frozen coil that had decided to behave badly when attention had turned elsewhere. He crooned to it as if it were a stubborn horse. Winter made sure the mess hall would know exactly when to hand a child a sweet roll, so that he would remember later that there had been sweet while the world shook. Han came to stand in the doorway of the command room with his unbelieving belief, and his loyal disloyalty, and all his contradictions making a music that, despite herself, she had learned to rely on. Chewbacca filled the door beside him like a blessing whose grammar was so old you could only feel it. "You were right," Han said, not sullenly, not gladly. "I hate that." "You don't hate it," Leia said, "because truth was a gift you could afford inside a besieged hour. You hate that it means we were right about the danger too." He looked past her at the map. The sensor nest kept remaking in the air with precise modesty. "We're not going to die here," he said, as if telling the room, as if telling the Falcon, as if telling himself. "No," Leia said. She felt the pattern take that word and lay it down like a card, in a game that did not allow cheating. "Not here." He nodded and was Han again. The man who could make a bad plan work by refusing to admit to the universe that it had ever been bad. "I'll get the Falcon ready." She wanted to say, "When the white is done with us, the sky will turn soft, and you will go where the air tastes like sugar and betrayal, and a man will make you smile with a memory you'd forgotten. And then the shadow will take someone you think you can live without and make a sculpture from him, and the sculpture will sing in your bones like a bell, and after that, you will live, and you will laugh again, and I will be off again." She did not say any of it. She said, "Be careful." "You too," he said, almost without mockery. When the first walkers came over the horizon, they were smaller than the stories made them, as monsters always are when you teach yourself to look them in the knees. Then they grew with every step until they were the right size for terror. Tyne's squad moved against them with a grace that reminded Leia of winter birds catching insects in a wind that should have blown them backward. Speed made an answer of the wrong question. The shield held, because Bren had told it a story about courage, and it had decided to believe him. The snow under the walkers did what snow does when you push it too far without learning its temper, and the ground sagged and heaved, and bit the heavy feet in a way that put an awkwardness into their stride you couldn't have put there otherwise. Men in white shouted and were precise. Men in gray shouted and were precise. Leia called numbers and saved breath, and felt the pattern feed her what she needed before she could want it. In the short interval between the second and third assault, when the white hummed like a live wire and the air tasted like boiled metal, the voice that was not a voice came again. It did not bring instruction. It brought recognition, the way you recognize yourself in a mirror after you have cut your hair and are not yet sure you like it, and the mirror informs you. You are you all the same. Ben, Poe, Yoda, Qui-Gon. The names were beads, yes, but they were also a string, and the string ran through her hand and through the hand of a boy who was a man, and had been a farm boy, and would soon, in a swamp, be a student, and then never merely a student again. Leia reached for the string and did not try to pull it. She held it. The holding felt like leading a frightened animal by not leading it at all. The shadow moved, slower than she had expected, faster than she had hoped. It appreciated a contest of patience. She appreciated one too. By the time the third wave sent the big feet forward, they had packed what they could pack and labeled what they could not with curses and prayers. The first convoy went up through a hole in the sky that Bren had told the shield to remember to leave. The Falcon complained loudly and honestly, and then launched with a pride that made Chewbacca thump his chest in approval. Tyne's laugh carried over the comm once, incredulous and delighted. She had made a shot no one had any right to make, and she knew it, and for one breath she allowed herself to be happy about it. Winter handed out the sweet rolls in the exact minute she had written for them. Children bit into sugar and remembered that the world was also that. Rikan stood with Leia and looked at the map, and then at her, as if measuring if the map could bear the weight of this woman. "We won't hold the field when they make their serious move," he said, and did not shape it like a question. "You already know where we lose and why." "Yes," Leia said. "We lose here, at just the length of a breath, so that we can keep the breath afterward." "Good," he said. "Then we're exactly the right kind of brave." When she finally allowed herself to sit, when she finally let the cold find all the places in her body where she had held it off by will alone, the white did not return as a terror or a promise. It came as a fact. Outside the walls, the walkers made their measured arrogance across a world that could swallow them if it chose. Inside the walls, a woman took off her gloves and flexed her fingers and wrote a new hour onto the air with her breath. Far away, a swamp waited with old patience. Far above, the city in the clouds lifted its chin to the sun, like a gambler turning a card no one had seen him pull. Light sat with her and did not ask anything of her for a time. The shadow sat with her too, but in the doorway, unwilling to cross the threshold until she invited it. She did not. Not yet. She had time. She had a web to grow used to in her hands, and places to set people down where the ground would hold, and breaths to steady for children who would remember later that a voice had kept the shape of the day from tearing. The alarms rose again. She stood. The pattern caught her weight and did not let her fall forward or back. She moved as if she had always been made for this, as if the white had been waiting for her specifically to come walk it, as if a swamp had once told a story to the stars about a girl who would learn to keep her own counsel, and then not keep it, and about a man in a cloud city who would smile and lie in love, and about a shadow who would reach out its hand and not be refused forever. She walked into the hour. The hour did not devour her. It bit lightly, like a training animal taking an offered glove, and waited to see what she would do next.